So imagine you're scrolling through, I don't know, social media, and you see a name that everybody's talking about. It could be a celebrity or a politician or a historical figure, right? You've heard of them, but do you really know them? I think that's how a lot of people feel about Jesus. The name is super familiar, but the real person, like, gets lost.
Yeah, that's such a good analogy. And in this deep dive, we're going to go beyond the name Jesus. We're using the Bible and also some surprising historical evidence to explore who he actually was.
Exactly. And I think it's important to say up front, this isn't about preaching. It's more about understanding whether you're a believer or not. You can't deny the impact Jesus has had.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because so many people think of Jesus as like this wise teacher with good advice. But the sources point to something much bolder than that. It's not just what he taught. It's who he claimed to be. He claimed to be the way to God. I mean, that's a pretty radical statement.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely not your average, like, self-help guru.
Yeah.
So when the sources refer to Jesus as the Messiah, what does that even mean?
So the concept of the Messiah, it's really deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. And it refers to a chosen one, someone sent by God to like deliver his people and start this whole new era. But here's the key. The idea of the Messiah, Jesus, didn't make this up. We're talking about prophecies that were written centuries earlier in the Old Testament.
Oh, wow. So there was this, like, expectation. People were waiting for someone like Jesus to come along.
Exactly. It's almost like all these prophecies were puzzle pieces scattered throughout history, you know, and then Jesus shows up and suddenly they all fit together. It's really hard to just dismiss that as coincidence.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the sources emphasize that Jesus didn't go around bragging. He didn't say, hey, I'm the Messiah. It was something that was like bestowed upon him, even at his baptism.
Oh, wow. So even from the very beginning, there were signs that he was special.
Exactly. The sources describe this incredible moment. God's Spirit comes down on Jesus, and a voice says, this is my son. It's really powerful. It kind of sets the stage for everything that comes after. And this idea of prophecy, it's a big deal. It's not just some random good person showing up. It suggests that his arrival was planned, purposeful.
I see what you're saying. These prophecies add another layer to the story. But what's really cool is that the evidence for Jesus, it doesn't just come from the Bible, right? There's historical accounts from outside of that.
That's a great point, especially for anyone who's a little skeptical. When you have sources outside Bible, sources that back up the story, it makes the whole thing a lot more believable. And the sources have a lot of fascinating examples, like Tacitus. He was a Roman historian, and he wrote about Jesus' execution under Pontius Pilate.
Wait, hold on. A Roman historian. That's huge. It's one thing to have accounts from Jesus's followers, but to have an outsider's perspective like that, it's like having an unbiased witness confirm the facts.
Exactly. And there's more. Josephus, who was a Jewish historian, he mentions Jesus too. He even calls him the Christ.
Wow.
And that's especially interesting because it's coming from within the culture Jesus lived in.
Right. So it seems like even during his lifetime, Jesus was making waves. He wasn't just some, random guy preaching in the desert.
Not at all. And it's amazing how far his influence reached, even among people who didn't follow him, like Mara bar Serapion. He was a Syrian philosopher, and he wrote about the wise king of the Jews.
A Syrian philosopher. So even back then, Jesus's teachings were reaching different cultures. This is fascinating. What other external accounts are mentioned in the sources?
Well, there's the Talmud. It's a collection of Jewish writings. And even it acknowledges that Jesus existed and that he was crucified. This is important because it shows that even within the Jewish community, Jesus was a known figure, and his death was a big deal.
So we've got Roman historians, Jewish historians, Syrian philosophers, even Jewish texts. So they all acknowledge Jesus. It's starting to feel like this is more than just some made-up story, like this really happened.
You're getting it. And there's more. Our sources talk about Pliny the Younger. He was a Roman governor, and he wrote to Emperor Trajan about early Christians who worshipped Christ as a god. Wow.
This letter gives us a glimpse into how Christianity was spreading and how it was already causing problems for the Roman Empire.
Amazing. Even with opposition from powerful authorities, this movement was taking off. What about early Christian writings? What do the sources say about those?
Well, there's the Gospel of Thomas. It's not part of the Bible, but it includes sayings that are attributed to Jesus.
Interesting.
It gives us more insight into his teachings and how they impacted those early Christian communities.
So we've got historical documents, philosophical writings, but the sources don't stop there. They bring in archaeology too. It's so cool that we have physical objects that back up the story. It's not just words on a page.
It definitely adds another layer of proof, especially for people who need to see something to believe it. And the sources highlight some pretty compelling details, like the Pilate stone. It's an inscription that proves Pontius Pilate was a real person.
Okay.
This directly connects to what the Bible says about Jesus' trial. And this crucifixion, wow, that's pretty solid evidence. And then there's the ossuary of James. Even though people argue about it, that inscription, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. That's pretty convincing. What is an ossuary, by the way?
It's like a container.
Right.
They used it in ancient Israel to hold the bones of the deceased after the
Okay.
body had decomposed. And yeah, the James ossuary is definitely a fascinating piece of the puzzle.
For sure. And then there's the Nazareth inscription that basically says, don't rob tombs.
Hmm.
It's not directly about Jesus, but it shows that people already believed in his resurrection.
Yeah.
Like really early on.
You got it. The fact that this decree even existed, it means that belief in Jesus' resurrection, it was already widespread, enough to worry the Roman authorities. They were concerned about people messing with tombs.
Wow. So we started with maybe just knowing the name Jesus. And now we've discovered this real person, backed up by historical accounts, philosophy, even archaeology. It's clear he wasn't made up. He actually walked the earth and left a lasting impact. But here's the big question, and it's one our sources emphasize. So what? Why should you care about all of this today? How does any of this matter for your life right now?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? It's like, what's the point of knowing all this stuff if it doesn't actually affect our lives?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are the big takeaways? Why does any of this matter to us today?
Well, the sources actually point to two main things, two takeaways that are super relevant, even if you're not, like, coming at this from a religious angle. The first one is the idea of Jesus as a role model. And it's not just about what he taught, you know? It's
Yeah.
about how he lived his life.
Okay, tell me more.
So the sources, they emphasize things like love, forgiveness, service. Those are values that most people agree are important, whether you're religious or not.
I get that. Those are things that resonate with everyone. But how do they connect to Jesus specifically?
Think about it. Jesus didn't just talk about love, he actually embodied it. He forgave people who did him wrong, even when they didn't deserve it. He served others. He put their needs before his own a lot of the time. It wasn't just talk with him, it was action.
Right. He walked the walk. And that's something we can all try to do.
Exactly. And if you think about it, like, on a larger scale, the world today, it's full of conflict, division, lack of empathy. It's like we're missing those qualities that Jesus embodied.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Even if you don't believe all the religious stuff about Jesus, there's still a lot we can learn from him, like how he treated people, how he dealt with difficult situations. Those are lessons that apply to everyone.
Absolutely. That's why the sources encourage us to see Jesus as a role model, not just for what he said, but for how he actually lived. It's about trying to live out those qualities, love, forgiveness, service, in our own lives, you know, in our relationships, our communities, the world around us.
That's a really powerful thought. It makes you stop and think about how you're living your own life. So that's one big takeaway. Jesus as a role model. What's the second one that the sources talk about?
This one's a little more tied to faith, but I think it's still meaningful even if you're not religious. It's the idea of Jesus' sacrifice.
Okay, I'm listening. What's this idea of sacrifice all about?
Think about it. What kind of commitment does it take to give up your life for something you believe in? It's a level of selflessness that's hard to comprehend, and that's what the sources emphasize about Jesus' sacrifice.
That makes sense. Even if you're not religious,
Yeah.
that idea is powerful, giving up everything for something you believe in. But what made Jesus' sacrifice so unique?
Well, the sources make it clear. This wasn't about personal gain or power or anything like that. It was rooted in love, love for humanity. This desire to, like, bridge the gap between us and God.
So even if you don't interpret it religiously, it's still an incredible act of love and selflessness.
Exactly. It's about putting others first, even to the point of death. And that message, it resonates with everyone. It's like a call to look at our own lives, our values, our actions, and ask ourselves, am I living a life of love and compassion? Am I making a difference?
That's a big question. It really makes you think. So we started this deep dive just knowing the name Jesus.
Yeah.
And now we've learned so much more. The history, the theology, the impact he had on people. It's clear he was a real person who lived a remarkable life.
Absolutely. And the sources don't stop there. They go even further. They give us specific ways to apply these ideas to our own lives.
Right. They don't just leave us hanging with these big concepts. They actually give us practical advice, which is really helpful. So where do we start? How do we take these qualities, love, forgiveness, service, and actually put them into practice?
Well, with love, the sources emphasize empathy, trying to understand other people, putting yourself in their shoes. You know, even if you disagree with someone, you can still try to see things from their point of view.
Right. It's like recognizing that everyone has their own story, their own experiences that have shaped who they are. But what about forgiveness? That's a tough one,
Mm.
especially when someone's really hurt you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Forgiveness is hard. But the sources say it's not about saying what someone did was okay. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment, that stuff that's weighing you down. There's this saying in the sources, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Wow. That's a powerful image. It's true, though. Holding on to grudges just hurts you in the end.
Exactly. And the sources remind us that forgiveness is a process. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
But even small steps towards letting go of anger, they can make a huge difference.
Okay, so love, forgiveness. What about service? How do we actually put that into practice?
It doesn't have to be some big dramatic thing. It can be as simple as listening to a friend who's going through a hard time, or volunteering in your community, or just being more aware of the people around you
Yeah.
and their needs. It's about remembering that we're all connected and that even small acts of kindness can make a difference.
I like that. It's recognizing that we're all part of something bigger
Mhm.
and that we have a responsibility to each other.
Exactly. And the sources point out that when we live a life of service, it not only helps others, it also gives us a sense of purpose. Like it makes our own lives feel more meaningful.
It's like we're connecting to something deeper, something beyond just ourselves.
You got it. And the sources say that this is what Jesus was all about. Living a life of love, forgiveness, service, not for himself, but for others.
It's incredible to think about. Someone who lived thousands of years ago can still have such a powerful influence on us today.
I know, it's amazing. And it shows how timeless his message really is, whether you see it from a religious perspective or just as a way to live a better life. The principles he lived by are still relevant today.
So it sounds like the sources are giving us a challenge. It's not enough to just know about Jesus or admire him from a distance. We have to take it a step further and ask ourselves, how can I live like this?
That's it. It's a call to action, a challenge to really embody these values.
Love, forgiveness, service. Imagine if everyone lived that way. The world would be a completely different place.
It'd be amazing.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Jesus.
Thanks for listening.
We hope you learned something new, and maybe even feel inspired to make some changes in your own life. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out to us. Until next time.